Hey,
Hey
Richard.
Chris, how you doing?
Not too bad. How are you doing?
Good. Yes, welcome. Thanks for joining us today. I appreciate it. You guys, are you heading out to DC for the satellite show?
I'm not. No.
No.
Are you going?
No, I was hoping to. Little bit gutted not to be going. It's one of my favourite events in the year, but hopefully get out to the Space Symposium if you guys are going to that. And I really want to get out to Utah as well. I don't know if you guys go to the small sat, but it's historically been in Logan, so this will be the first year that it gets moved to Salt Lake City. So I'm pretty excited for that.
We don't usually go to the space conferences because whenever I don't usually go to space conferences. I
Yeah.
usually go to the conferences where my customers are, but our technology team tends to go to those conferences. I don't think we are going to Space Symposium this year. I did check it out last year. Really big event.
It's
Lots and
huge.
lots of walking. I really wish I wore better shoes.
Yeah, absolutely. Lots of walking, lots of coffee.
Yeah, yeah, lots of walking, lots of coffee, and very dry weather. Tons of water.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for joining us today. I appreciate it. Looking forward to the conversation. It'd be great, I guess, if you could kick off and talk our listeners through the early days of Chris, where you started in life, grew up, that sort of thing, school, college, and how eventually led your way into your sort of earlier career. I think it was Arrival Oil Tools before co-founding, was it Promethean Labs?
Yeah. Oh boy, yeah. Back when I was a young warthog.
Yeah.
Let's see. So first off, I actually grew up in Southeast Asia. I was born in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. When I was 5 weeks old, my father moved us all out to Bangkok, Thailand. We had come back to Canada for about a year when I was like two, but otherwise I moved to Singapore and Jakarta, Indonesia, and I was there until I was 13. Came back to Canada when I was 13, moved to Okotoks, Alberta, and I don't expect anybody on the call to know where that is, but it's south of Calgary, and I spent a lot of my high school years there. I was not like at the time you would not have guessed that that I would get into this industry. I actually did better in English and social studies than I did in math and science, which is weird to think about. I was also more of an acting kid and all that stuff. But I was talking to my counselor, and my counselor was like, "Oh, you're really good at math and science, and you like it. Why don't you be an engineer?" And my father was in the oil industry. He was a directional
Yeah.
driller, worked with lots of mechanical engineers, and he suggested I do that. And so back then, if you grew up in Alberta and you wanted to be an engineer, then your career path was to work in the oil patch. That's just how it worked. There was no space industry here. There was no there was no big software companies. It's oil and gas.
Yeah.
That's really the big industry here. So fast forward, I get into the University of Alberta for mechanical engineering, and I start my internship at Arrival Oil Tools. And the first summer I'm there, I'm working on drawings. I'm doing everything that a mechanical engineering intern does.
Yeah.
And I was on a 15-minute break, and I remember because it was the last. I remember scrolling through Facebook trying to find something to do, and I saw this link about for the live stream of the space last launch of the space shuttle. It was Atlantis. It
Yeah.
was 2011, and I was like, oh, that's really cool. I've never seen a rocket launch before, and so I watched it. And when I was watching it, it almost lit a fire inside of me, because at the end of it, I was like, you know what? I don't want to do oil and gas. I want to do that. I want to
Yeah.
find out how I'm going to do that. The problem was that there's no space in there's no space in Alberta.
Yeah.
So I was trying to figure out where I could find some opportunities, and eventually I did find a student group at the University of Alberta called Alberta Sat One. They were part of the Canadian Satellite Design Challenge. They were.
Yeah.
It was the first. It was the first time. For the first competition for Canadian universities to build a cube satellite, and the winner would get to launch it to space. I joined when a lot of the group was graduating, and so as a result, I ended up becoming the project manager of the group. And when I was the project manager, first it's important to realize that, like, we had no idea how to build satellites. Like if you imagine like picking somebody off the street and saying, hey, do you want to build a satellite? That's the level of knowledge that we had.
Yeah.
The second thing is that when I joined the group, one of the earliest things I did was set a new vision for the group. I decided I wanted to live and work in Alberta. But there's no space industry here. That meant we had to build one. And the reason I wanted to do that, I wanted it for myself and for other students, was because if you wanted to join the space industry, you couldn't move to the United States. You had to have a green card or a citizenship. And at the time, companies weren't sponsoring that. So you'd either have to move out east, or you'd have to go to Europe or New Zealand to Rocket Lab. So we said, you know what? We're going to build a satellite. We're going to enter in the next competition. We're going to build a satellite. We're going to learn how to do it. By doing that, we're going to learn. We're going to create the academic backbone needed for a space industry to blossom in Alberta. And then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to spin off and start a company. And that's how we're going to build a space industry here. Realizing, of course, that, we were like 2021 and we had no idea how the world worked. And we were like, oh, we'll just build an industry. That's easy enough, right?
Yeah, no problem.
No problem. Well, so over the next few years, the group grew. I ended up stepping down as project manager and letting somebody else step up, Charles Noakes, who also works for a space company now. And we, as a group, we ended up building and launching Alberta's first satellite. But we also did something really important. We built this amazing student group that has become a program that's launched more satellites. And then after that satellite was launched, we went off and started a company. The first company I did start was Promethean Labs. And when at the time, I was looking to start a company in the space industry, and Promethean Labs was intended to be about greenhouse gas measurement. I would say that we made every mistake a startup could make. So it was a really good learning experience. Yeah. At the end of the day, I ended up leaving Promethean Labs. There wasn't a good fit between me and the rest of the founders, and so I said, you know what, it'd be better if I left, because you folks have a better working relationship than I do with all of you. So it'd be better for the company if I just left. And so after some time, I remember it was October 2017. I was trying to figure out what my next thing was going to be, and I was exploring a ton of concepts. I was looking at electricity generation on the moon, on the dark side of the moon. I was exploring Earth observation. I was exploring in-space manufacturing, and I was exploring hyperspectral. And one of the things I realized was that the economics for hyperspectral were really great because of miniaturization of technology, because of the cloud, because the rate that which you would pay to download data had fallen, and the price of imagery today, and what you could solve with hyperspectral. There was no commercial hyperspectral suppliers. So I had a great business model that I could build and show that economically this is a great business. Then I met one of my now co-founders, Kristen Cote, for lunch, and we had discussed this other technology called deployable optics, and we put those two things. She had been talking about it because she wanted to research it, and we put those two things together over lunch. And we realized, hey, if we had the satellite that could take a giant space optic, fold it up into a small size, launch it to space, and unfold it when it's there, and then we combine that with hyperspectral, we can get really high resolution hyperspectral with really good SNR from a very small and cost-effective satellite. We could change it. We could change how Earth observation is done, and that was the basis we started Wyvern on. I mean, there was other reasons. We wanted to build a space industry here still. Probably one of the biggest reasons I've stayed in Canada, because it is really hard to build a space industry. It's really hard to build a space company in Alberta compared to other places. We also wanted to do something good for Earth, and hyperspectral data was a great opportunity to do that. And that was 2018 in March. So myself, Kristen, my co-founders Callie Lacina and Curtis Broda, we started Wyvern March 2018.
Awesome, amazing.
Sorry for the rant, Richard.
No, it's okay. No, it's really interesting going from oil and gas to space. So I'd love to know how the old man took the conversation. He said, I'm not going to drill wells anymore. I'm going to go for space. And interestingly, actually, my dad has always been in oil and gas, more on the procurement, the supply chain side. And we actually moved abroad with him to a place called Bahrain, but he's been all over the world. And he actually lived in Jakarta for 10 years. And he still says to this day, Jakarta was his favorite place he ever lived. And he's lived everywhere.
Jakarta was an absolutely wonderful place to live. On one hand, like, it's always easy to go back, like, to look back in time and say if things worked out differently.
Yeah.
I do wish I could have stayed in Jakarta longer, but I'm so glad I even had the opportunity. It was a wonderful place to live. You comment on oil and space. That I get that a lot. My dad was a directional driller, and he used to tell me about all the technology they used to drill this this very long hole in the world and steer this tiny bit. A lot of technologies are very similar to what we do in space, at least fundamentally.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, on that note, could you tell us about Wyvern? What do you guys do? How do you fit into the space ecosystem, and where do you see the company evolving over the next few years?
100%. So we are a hyperspectral data supplier. So we do high resolution hyperspectral. Right now, we've got 5-meter ground sample distance hyperspectral images available from satellites in space, and we only do that. We don't do analytics. We don't build satellites ourselves. We partner with somebody else for that. We focus on doing two things really well. We capture, deliver, and high quality hyperspectral data, and we also develop the payload that I mentioned previously, this deployable optic. Yeah. Those are the two things that we specifically focus on. And today we've got 3 satellites up with our partner Clyde Space. We've got another satellite. Loft has got a satellite launching that we have a payload on hopefully really soon here. And we've got a 5th going up later this year. The future of Wyvern, we very much want to focus on being a data supply company. We want to focus on good quality data. So, the thing that you can expect from us is one, to see a lot more satellites go up so that we can increase our capacity, increase our temporal frequency, and also start expanding into other wavelengths and getting to higher resolutions and also higher SNRs. That's the direction that we're going in right now.
Absolutely. And I guess on that, unpacking that specific part of the ecosystem that you guys fit into, what's your thoughts on the sort of the current status of the whole Earth observation hyperspectral industry, and how do you see the hyperspectral technology evolving over the next sort of 5 to 10 years, and what part do you see Wyvern playing in that development?
So I think the current state for Earth observation specific to hyperspectral, it's very nascent. It's very early days, and you're seeing different companies, our own competitors and us, with different theses on what is the best business model to go forward with. And one thing that you'll see in the next 10 years is you'll figure out who's right, or who's more right and who's less right, or so on. Or you'll find out that there's actually a lot of, that certain hyperspectral companies fit a certain niche and other ones fit a certain niche. For us, the big bet that we're making is that a lot of analytics is hyperlocal. If you, for a great example, and that's why we don't do analytics ourselves, you need to have a lot of subject matter expertise. You need to have a lot of local relationships, and those algorithms that you develop aren't necessarily scalable globally because of local details that are specific to the ecosystem, to how things are done, to the timing for agriculture, the timing of planting. So we're betting that if we supply data to the world, you're going to see all those analytics companies, those data consumers, and those hyperlocal ecosystems consuming the data. That's our bet. Other companies are betting that they can expand and scale analytics across the world. And there's other companies that are betting that if they vertically integrate the entire supply chain, that they'll get the best bang for their buck. So it's honestly too early to say who's right. What I will say is that we, with the customers that we speak to, a lot of them really resonate with the fact that we're not competing with them, and that we're leaving the expertise of analytics to them and focusing on the data quality. That's been really good for them, and we've seen traction as a result. I'll also say that some folks, I've heard some folks talk about hyperspectral as a silver bullet. It's going to change the world. It's going to change the world really fast. And it's not a silver bullet like any other Earth observation data set. It's just, it is a very valuable tool that will help solve an issue, but it's not going to solve everything for you. And there's a lot of use cases that we just don't know about yet because nobody's had access to commercial hyperspectral data from space. And we're seeing that already. We're seeing people say, hey, can you do this? And we're figuring out, oh, hey, you can do that. That's really cool. And so you're going to see the market grow over the next few years. It'll look a little bit slower than you might think, but then it's going to skyrocket, in my opinion. As people start figuring out those use cases, as they start getting access to that commercial hyperspectral imagery, you're going to see people build business cases that we've never even thought of. And then it's going to explode.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that you guys are so focused as well. I think that's definitely why I've seen a lot of success with commercial space startups, is that they're not getting, distracted by all these different things. And, by the proverbial woman in the red dress, shall we say, is doubling down on what we want to do. And for you guys, it's doubling down the hyperspectral, the quality of the imagery, everything else will follow suit.
100%. And having built satellites, I can tell you I'd rather not build them if I can avoid it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess in terms of the space industry, now that you've made that transition a long time ago now from oil and gas getting into space, now you've kind of been in the sector for so many years. What is it that you've come to love most about being in the space industry?
Well, I love the culture that space people have around, the excitement to really push boundaries and try new things. I love the fact that you go to an event and you'll know a lot of people there because of how small the network is. I love that about the space industry. I also love how people are tying what you can do in space to life on Earth, and how that will increase the average day-to-day quality of life for you and I. It's really cool that Varda is looking at manufacturing pharmaceuticals in space.
Yeah,
like I use pharmaceuticals all the time. It's really neat. I think that's the thing I love most about it. It is an optimistic industry that it's almost like David fighting Goliath in the sense that it seems like such a huge issue, but everybody is so optimistic and eager to conquer it anyway.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think culture is definitely something that comes up consistently in terms of what people love about it. And echo what you said about the events as well. And it's that kind of togetherness, collaborative feel. And I know you mentioned earlier around competition and competitors. It seems like even companies, when I go to these events and kind of observe the culture that you're talking about there, is that even people that maybe are considered as competitors, they don't really act like it. Everybody is helping each other, and genuinely everybody wants to see everyone else succeed too. Because even though they might be using different technology use cases, everybody wants to see each other when everyone's kind of collectively on the same mission. So I've definitely seen that culture.
That's a really good point. And this is true at Wyvern, and I believe it's true at a lot of space companies, is that most of us don't necessarily start the company just because we want to make a buttload of money and be Hollywood billionaire. Sorry, that was probably anyway. The point, we just don't have that kind of thing in Alberta. But that's a lot of startups that they want to increase the wealth for themselves and their employees and for their communities, and also for their future retirement. A lot of space people like to start companies to do that, but also with a higher purpose in mind. Improving Earth's environment, expanding humanity into space. That's really cool. And I love that. And the way it impacts how we view competitors. You're right. I really hope the best for all of my competitors, because it's still advancing the overall mission.
Yeah, absolutely. And on that point of advancing humanity and looking to the future, one of the key motives of this podcast is trying to make space accessible for everyone. Tell the stories of great co-founders like yourself and your kind of journey into the space sector. But is making space more accessible. I think when I go to these events that we keep on talking about, when you talk to people that have been in the industry, well, everyone's very excited. Everyone's, like you say, optimistic about the future. And, space isn't slowing down. There's more and more space companies that pop up every other month, which is fantastic to see in the growth. It's not really getting any easier to kind of find the talent to sustain that growth and keep on growing that for the future. So, in your opinion, what do you feel we could and should be doing more at, like, maybe a grassroots level in the classrooms, at STEM level in the schools, to try and demystify the space sector and make it more accessible for everyone? And by the way, it's not just exclusive to kids too. It's even people that are in other industries, automotive, or I always say automotive, any other industry. Because I don't know about you, I've only been doing this 6.5 years, but my friends and family now, as soon as I say space, the immediate perception is astronauts, rocket scientists, astrophysicists. That's it. So, what could we be doing differently to try and make space more accessible for that future growth?
Oh, I mean, you just hit the nail on the head. We mythologize space. And the myth is a little bit scary when it comes, because astronauts are exemplary people. Rocket scientists tend to be exemplary. At least that's the mythology around space. And I'm not using the term as a suggestion that it's not true or anything like that. That's the story, and stories matter. You have to change the story. You have to make it clear to kids, to university students, to high school students, that you don't have to be like, Sheldon Cooper from Big Bang Theory to do something in space.
Yeah.
You can be like, in my case, I had like an 80% in, like an 84% in science in high school. You don't have to be super smart person. You can just go out and do it. It's accessible. And you also have to show that it's accessible. That was one of the things that we managed to do with the University of Alberta, was we were able to show, hey, a bunch of students who worked in oil and gas who had no idea what space, the first satellite design we had was a joke. But we took feedback and we did it again. And people have to realize you can do that. You can try this stuff out, and it's accessible. You got to change the story though first.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I think it's changing the story. I think that's a great point. I think it's making it, when you change a story, it's making it relatable, isn't it, to those whatever audience it is, whether it's the next generation or people in different industries. Because the example I always go to is Uber. Everybody knows Uber. A lot of people don't think of Uber as a space company leveraging space data to be able to use their app and stuff. So I think making it relatable, absolutely. And what you just mentioned there, I mean, that's a very good point. And kind of my next question was this whole thing around failures, lessons learned, achievements and stuff, talking about that next generation. They're on social media, they're seeing the highlight reel of everybody's successes and the end goal, the finish line. They don't always see all those lessons learned, all those satellite designs that led to the success. So what would you say throughout your career has been your biggest lessons that you've learned? And to date, what would you say has been your biggest achievement?
Oh boy, biggest lessons I've learned. There's a lot of them.
Yeah.
Let me start with the biggest achievement, because that's easier.
Yeah.
I mean, the biggest achievement I've had is getting Wyvern this far. We've launched things into space. We've built a product. We've sold that product. We're continuing to sell that product. As a space company, especially Earth observation, I consider that a pretty big achievement. Not a lot of EO companies get to that point. There's still lots of milestones to hit before I would say that we're successful. But we're that's a big deal. Now, in terms of biggest lessons learned, are you interested from the technical side or the business side?
Both. I think it would be, again, just on the theme of kind of making it accessible, is that I imagine there'll be people listening to this that are kind of still looking at space as like just way beyond their reach and they'll never do it. But also people that are maybe building their first business or actually considering, I'm working at Lockheed, I want to go and start up my own business, but kind of, I guess, listening to this to see what golden nuggets they can get from lessons learned. So either or.
Oh, all right. Well, why don't we start on the technical side?
Yeah.
One of the biggest lessons learned I had is that especially in the early days of building satellites as a student group, was that execution and effort was 9/10 of the 9/10 of success.
Yeah.
It wasn't the smartest person in the room. It wasn't the most talented. It was the person who showed up every day consistently and just kept on working on the problem. Um, I getting over that fear of this being a subject that's too big for you is easily the most important step that you need to do when you're doing anything with space. It actually really helped that we had no context about the way, like we had no space culture here, because there was nobody there to say, oh, space is hard, don't do this. That's another thing I've learned not to do, is that when you are encountering new minds, and this is a common thing that space people do, is when you bring up a new idea in space, we tend to talk about why it can't be done or why it will be so hard to do. We need to stop doing that, because you just got to try. And you're like, yeah, it's hard. It's like everything in life is hard.
Yeah.
And there's lots of other hard things to do. Building a cell phone, like an iPhone, is a hard thing to do. Doing it correctly millions and millions of times over the course of a year is also hard to do. Like, that doesn't mean that we can't do it. And there are going to be obstacles. It's great to point those out, but learning not to dissuade people by immediately hearing their idea and saying, oh, that's not going to work for this and this reasons, it's going to be really hard, you shouldn't do it. That's probably easily one of the biggest things I've learned. It sounds trivial, but I still see it happen all the time. You go to you talk about a crazy idea. I mean, just look at SpaceX and landing legs. I can easily imagine the first conversations he might have had with a NASA scientist about that. It's not going to work. It's not economical or something like that. You just got to go out and try. You got to figure it out. You got to do the math before you jump to conclusions, but also you got to encourage people. You got to encourage people to jump in, because their effort is the thing that's going to pay off, not their intelligence. Their intelligence is a factor, but it's the effort that's going to lead to success. It's action that's going to beget success. I would say that another thing that I learned very early on is that meticulousness in space is worth its weight in gold.
Yeah.
You don't have to be smart, but if you're meticulous and you double check the things that you're doing, you can avoid a lot of really crappy issues later on. So I learned this when we were building our satellite for Exalta 1. One of the things I did that was really good was I was so meticulous about part numbers, about mass, about the center of mass for every single part in our mechanical design. And I was meticulous about, the latest spec sheet, updating that, having a product data management server and system. And that yielded a lot of dividends, because when it came to assemble the satellite, all the folks that were doing it, our project manager and our systems engineer, they were able to look at the CAD model and say, okay, this is the part. And I had organized all the parts into bags with part numbers, and I'd cleaned all the parts. So we avoided a lot of issues that could have happened because I was so meticulous about that. On the other hand, here's a place that I was not as meticulous as I should have been. One of the things I did not do is I did not check the requirement for moment of inertia as carefully as I should have for that satellite.
Yeah.
And as a result, we had to make a last minute change in order to fit the satellite's moment of inertia requirement. And we got lucky, that I was trying to put masses all over the satellite that fit within the mass budget and also increase the moment of inertia in certain axes. We couldn't make it work until our systems engineer came up with something so clever, involving the boom of the satellite and just modifying it a little bit. And we were able to get back into spec, but that could have been disastrous if I had been more meticulous. We would have solved that issue ahead of time.
Yeah.
And if we did not catch it, then the whole mission would have been screwed. We would have gotten into space and the satellite wouldn't have worked. So meticulousness is worth its weight in gold. I would say that another thing I've learned from a business perspective on the startup side, is that it's so, like, as an engineer in the early startup days, it was so tempting to just look at the technology first. Like, that's the important thing. That's the company. That's what I believed.
Yeah.
That's not the reality. The reality is that the technology supports the business. You need to talk to customers. You need to go talk to customers as soon as possible. And you need to talk to them often, and you need to convince them to pay for your product. And if they won't, then you got to change your product. Focus on that before the technology. That's the other thing I learned pretty hard in the early days of Wyvern.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And on that thread, in terms of people that are listening to this, that want to do this, they want to build, the next Wyvern and the next space company, whatever it is, or even someone just wants to move into the space industry, technical and non-technical. Would you say along the way when you made that transition, and was there any resources that you identified kind of on the journey that people listening to this could access, and if they want to make that change, if they really want to get into the space sector, that you identified throughout your career? It can be, courses, info, mentors, etc.
Oh boy. When I started as a student in the space industry, honestly, there's literally was no space people here except for, a few professors. And
Yeah.
they weren't space people like NASA space people. They were professors that used research from spacecraft, but they were still the most helpful folks ever. There's a lot of literature out there that will help you understand space technology design. But if you're starting a business, I find that, some of the best resources you could have are mentors and other startup CEOs, other startup co-founders who've gone through this before. And frankly, there's lots of detail on, like Y Combinator has a lot of information on their website. You should go read those.
Yeah.
That's honestly the best thing. That's the best thing you can do.
Awesome.
Mentors, talk to Y Combinator, that kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I said it on my last episode, but mentor seems to be a common theme for everyone that I've spoken to. I feel like we could do an entire segment on mentors, but I think, again, for the next generation, I don't think they know where to start with it. I think I'm gonna think about implementing something into the podcast where it's like, how do you even identify a mentor? Because mentors, I think, can be seasonal throughout your life and your career as well. But yeah, couldn't agree more. And I guess finally, by the way, thanks so much for coming on today. This has been an awesome conversation. The final question for me is, all this information, all the wisdom that you've acquired through going through your journey building Wyvern, if you could distill all of that information down to one single piece of advice for people wanting to get into space sector this year, what would it be?
As long as the fundamentals check out, just go do it. Just go try it out and see what happens. Don't be dissuaded by folks telling you can't do it or it's too hard. Just give it a shot. As long as it's physically possible and it's within and it is lawful, you should try it.
Absolutely. And people in the space industry will help you get there too. So yeah, Chris, this has been amazing. Thanks again for your time and joining us today. And yeah, have a great rest of your week and really enjoy the conversation.
Thank you, Richard. I hope you have a good one, and thank you for inviting me.
Awesome. Take care. Thanks, Chris.